How the hell could this happen to me? What am I talking about? I almost died of a heart attack, and I had just passed a stress test and still had the heart attack. Type 2 diabetes is the source root cause of all of the major diseases these days. These evolutionarily developed bodies were built for a high-fat, low-carb diet.
Yes.
It's ancestral. Why doesn't the cardiology community know this? My ignorance in the whole area. I had this heart attack because I didn't know about the testing. And there's this one test that...
Hello and welcome. Carrie here from Healing Humanity, the power of a proper human diet. And today I am honored, I'm excited, I'm fired up to interview Daniel Trevor, Unholy Trinity. I love this book, and this isn't flattery. We're going to link to the book. I'm not using an affiliate link. I don't want anything. I truly believe this book could save people's lives. If I would have had this book like 10, 15 years ago, that's my only complaint, Daniel Trevor, about this book is I wish I had it 15 years ago because, man, I've been through some stuff. But welcome to the channel, Daniel. Thank you for being here.
Hey, thank you. And that is my biggest complaint, too, that I didn't know this stuff. I didn't know this data. So, yeah, because look, like I was saying prior to the starting, I share so much with you, your passion and your degree of being pissed off about not knowing this stuff. And see, the book is the reason why the book is unique is because I'm not a doctor or a scientist. Fortunately, early on, I learned how to study well. And I've studied technical data all my life. So I felt comfortable in taking the dive into the medical and nutrition science to find out how the hell could this happen to me? What am I talking about? I almost died of a heart attack. And I thought I was Mr. Healthy. I was, kind of lean and symptom free. And then I discovered in my research that there's about 1% of the population that can be on the slim side and yet still be metabolically very unhealthy and have I had 4 comorbidities, which I'll get into. I was like Dr. Peter Attia. He was, triathlons, incredible athlete and everything, right? And then he was from drinking so much Gatorade, he developed type 2 diabetes. And type 2 diabetes, as you know, causes all of the other metabolic problems, whether it's heart attacks, strokes, cancers, sleep apnea, PCOS, amputations, and it's just on and on, right? So I didn't have any symptoms because none of these diseases have symptoms, right? By the time you have symptoms, you are way down the line and it's a long road back, or it's just too late. I mean, check out this stat. Over 50% of the people who have a deadly first heart attack, their very first symptom of heart disease is their own death. It's like, what? Wow. I had so many WTF moments in all my research. And I tell the reader near the beginning of the book, I say, look, I know you might be thinking, without formal university medical degrees and organic chemistry and all that, why the hell should I trust you? And I tell them, don't. My book contains more scientific citations and references than any other book out there, than any other health book extant. They mostly have, if any, 200 or 300. My book has 1,227. That was an extra 100 hours right there because it was. I knew I needed to have that backup. So my point is that none of this is Daniel's opinion. Just think of me as a friendly relay point of what the best of 21st century science has to offer for your health and wellness and longevity. And fix yourself. Yeah, I did, and you can too.
Well, I love that. What I love about the book too is, frankly, the fact that you are an individual that wrote it versus coming from a doctor's perspective, because it's like, you've been there. You almost died of a heart attack. A lot of people that I'm talking to have suffered chronic health issues and things like that. So getting it from your perspective, but I absolutely love what you said. The 1,200 plus sources in here. It's incredible. And that's what I always tell people. I'm like, so many people are scared to eat a proper human diet or change the way they're doing things. But it's like, I'm not even telling you to do this. It's that information out there. And it's almost like you've curated all of that into here and made it easy to understand. And I couldn't put it down. I just kept reading more and more. You got so many good stats in there, like the one you just mentioned. Another one you had in there that I really loved that I guess I knew, but I never heard before, was that carbs do not satisfy hunger. They stimulate hunger.
Yes.
It's so true. It's so true.
Yeah,
That's why
absolutely.
people trying to moderate carbs or moderate an addiction to something like that, and you keep stimulating more and more, it makes sense that we yo-yo diet for so many years. But I guess before we get into some of that, could we talk a little bit more about your backstory? You mentioned the heart attack. Like, how did that all come about? That was in the beginning of the book, and it was very interesting.
Yeah, well, see, that came about. Again, I thought I was Mr. Healthy. You know, I'm a lot older than you, but again, I share all your passion for getting this information out to people because I'm really nothing special. I'm just a lower class street kid from Philly who was fortunate to learn how to study well early so I could, you know, not that I was a fabulous grade A student or anything, but if there was a subject that I wanted to look into, you couldn't keep me from it. I was able to conquer anything. So, anyway, so yeah, I was eating a high carb diet and I didn't know. And I had just passed a stress test and still had the heart attack. I passed it with flying colors, right? And I have a whole section on that in my section where I dive deep into cardiovascular disease, if anybody's interested in that, or they have it in their family and they need to, you know, take heed. Chapter 17, 18, 19, and 20. And I go into all that, why stress tests don't work. And also there's Dr. Ford Brewer. The reason I bring him up is he is an internationally acclaimed preventive medicine expert out of Johns Hopkins, and he's taught and trained thousands of doctors over the years. And I read, and he's brilliant on all the testing, right? So I reached out to him and I said, would you write a chapter on what are the most important blood labs and scans that anyone can get online without needing their doctor's prescription so they can find out if they've got something lurking inside, ready to pounce, or they're just fine, or somewhere in between that needs attention? Because that's so important because there's so many of these tests that let's say you find out about it and you go to your doctor, hey, I want this one, or I want that one. They might say, oh, you don't need that. You don't need that. You're fine. And the only reason they're telling you that is because they don't know what it is and they wouldn't know how to analyze it anyway, right? And the last thing doctors want to get is homework from their patients, right? So the reason I bring him up is, you know, I after the heart attack, I went into Google University, YouTube University, and all these books and studies, and I just immersed myself there, right? And one of the first people I found was him. He had this video. It was something like how I reversed 20 years of arterial plaque, or how to do it like I did. I thought, I got to watch this. So it was back then, this is like, you know, a few years ago, they were very complicated. His videos have gotten a lot less complicated now. But I was able to follow it. If I didn't, I looked up the words. That's the key. You have to pay attention to the nomenclature and the terminology of anything that you're studying. You know, because most people, they'll read a book and the stats on people finishing nonfiction books are just out the roof. I mean, they don't finish them. I mean, I don't know. I think it's only about 50% because what happens is they'll get to a line, they'll have a word in it they're not familiar with. They get to a word, let's say it's cardiovascular. What is that? And you got to look it up. I mean, it's a painstaking process because what will happen is you won't understand that paragraph. Your eyes will get to the bottom of the page. You'll go blank and you'll go, what did I just read? You know, and so you got to go back up and okay, I got what he's saying here, got what he's saying there, and so on. And oh, cardiovascular. And these days we have these phones. We can say, hey, Siri, what's the definition of the word cardiovascular?
Right.
You got to do it because the more you do it, the less you have to do it.
Right.
It's kind of your vocabulary shoots way up. You gain a lot more IQ points. Believe me, it's just amazing. And when I say the less you have to do it, the more you do it, is that it's like a stream that's kind of wearing off the banks and leads into a river, and you become, you know, Mr. Smarty Pants. But anyway, that's what you have to do. And the reason I bring that up is because I really was careful enough I thought, I need to write this for like Uncle Joe or my brother Dave or somebody who's not technically oriented. And I may use a technical term, but I'll explain what it is. I wrote it for the average reader of health and wellness so they can understand. If I use the word endothelium, in parentheses, I'll put lining of the arteries. And I'll do that for the next couple of times, and then you got it by then, right? So it's anybody can get into this. Well, you got to be a reader. I mean, of course, there are some people that don't read, but anyway, so I had this high carb diet. I had the heart attack, and then it sent me to those universities and books and everything. And I was shocked. I was shocked and infuriated because, like you, because what we've been told to eat for decades is killing us.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if we look at in the first few chapters of the book, especially chapters 1 and 2, I give the whole history of how did we get here. And one of the culprits back in the 60s was, there was a epidemic of heart attacks and people having heart disease in the 1950s. In fact, we had President Eisenhower had a heart attack, and men and women were dropping in the prime of their life, and they're going, what's going on? And there was this guy come along, and I'm sure you know, Ansel Keys.
Yeah.
This joker, he had this concept that it was the meat and the cheese and the butter and all that was clogging up the arteries. And the analogy he gave was kind of like a shower drain, with the hair and the soap and the gook and it all. And it doesn't work that way at all.
Right.
In fact, the plaque is underneath the arteries. It's subendothelial. So he had it all wrong. But he was very unethical. And if you look into his science, but very influential. And so by the late 60s, early 70s, Big Food came in with all this low-fat, non-fat foods, but it had high carbs and high sugar to make it tasty, because when you remove fat from things, it doesn't taste as good, right? And what had happened was, years later, when they discovered this thing called microscopy, where they were able to snake these little teeny tiny cameras up into the arteries, they could see this thing called the glycocalyx. What is that? The glycocalyx is this fuzz-like lining of the arterial walls, the endothelium, and it acts as the first line of protection against what's called small, dense LDL particles from invading and getting stuck underneath subendothelial and then building up plaque over time. What happened was, what they discovered was the epidemics of heart attacks and heart disease, because the chart looks like this, from 1900. I have the chart in here. I have a lot of graphs and images and that kind of thing to make it easier for the reader to understand. And the chart looks like this, right? From 1900 to 1955. And they found that smoking, which was an epidemic, destroys the glycocalyx. So of course, you're going to destroy that. And let's face it, everybody was smoking back then. It was like the doctors smoked around their patients, and it was just really truly an epidemic. And that was destroying the glycocalyx, which is the first line of protection against all those bad small dense LDL particles, and that led to all that. What's a bigger destroyer of the glycocalyx, which they found? The carbohydrates from grains and sugars. So they replaced one, because smoking did go down, and they replaced it with a more destructive item for the glycocalyx by the early set. And if you look at a chart, which I have in the book, the graph on obesity is like this, and then here's where they put in the U.S. dietary guidelines, like over here, right? And then the obesity is like this. And so again, that was in the 70s. And so that's why I say what they've been telling us to eat for decades is killing us.
It's so crazy too, because there's so many parallels between the cigarettes and the food, like getting kids hooked early from a young age, advertising campaigns, normalizing it. Well, everyone's just doing it. It's just fine. And now it's just repeating with the standard American diet and food. I think that's one of the big challenges with this too, is not only are people addicted like they were with cigarettes, but it's so normalized. When I talk to people about this, they're just like, oh, it's not that big. Just eat in moderation. Grandma gives you birthday cake and sugar cookies and all this stuff. It's not that bad. So overcoming that social norm is such a tricky thing, I think.
It is. It is very, and then what doesn't help is that you have these big food. They have these PhDs and geniuses in their conference rooms around the world figuring out, okay, so what ingredients can we put in to make them eat more of it?
Right.
So it's more bottom line and profits as opposed to what's good for human beings. And because none of this stuff, these unholy trinity of the carbs, sugar, and oils, and for your audience, my book is called Unholy Trinity. The subtitle is How Carbs, Sugar, and Oils Make Us Fat, Sick, and Addicted, and How to Escape Their Grip. How carbs, sugar, and oils make us fat, sick, and addicted, and how to escape their grip. And I'm just really excited about it because it's relatively new out there. And what I'm even more excited about is I was able to gather these killer endorsements from some people that are just like, I'm starstruck with them, right? Physicians who are also New York Times bestselling authors, cardiologists. Well, I have, Dr. Philip Ovadia.
Yes.
Cardiologist, cardiothoracic surgeons, done over 3,000 heart operations.
Right.
He wrote me a killer endorsement for it. And he's also carnivore.
Yeah.
And, also I have the winner of the Nobel Prize in Medicine for his discovery of nitric oxide, which is so important to the arteries and all that. And on and on. I have a lot of, Dr. Ken Berry and so on. So anyway, it turns out that I was, because of my ignorance in the whole area, I had this heart attack because I didn't know about the testing. And there's this one test that I cover in chapter 7, that section I call the most important health tests you've never had. And the reason why that's important is because it will detect where you are on the diabetic spectrum. Because as you know by now, type 2 diabetes is the source root cause of all of the major diseases these days. Your heart attacks, strokes, cancers, PCOS, on and on, like, we were discussing earlier. And so that's why that's so important. And the test is OGTT with insulin, oral glucose tolerance test with insulin. And doctors never order it. You can order it online now for about $50 and find out where you are in the diabetic spectrum. Because, see, the reason why that's so important is, here's a study that's really, I should mention. Let's see, 2019, out of Johns Hopkins, they came out with this results of a big survey of doctors, and they found that 74% of doctors, now we're talking internists, family physicians, cardiologists, do not know how to properly diagnose and test for prediabetes or type 2 diabetes. It's like, what? Are you kidding me? All they do, and I discussed this with Dr. Ken Berry on his podcast. You may have seen that. All they do, most doctors, they'll check A1C and fasting blood glucose. And even the American Diabetes Association will tell you, hey, if you just do those two, you're going to miss 70% of the patients, if not more. You have to check this OGTT with insulin, oral glucose tolerance test with insulin, because most people will, like me, I would do that. I would go to my doctor, get my test, my A1C and my fasting blood glucose, and fasted and everything. And I passed them. A lot of people can pass them at showing normal readings until you get this one. When I did that, it was like after my heart attack, I decided to get a lot of tests that I found out about from Ford Brewer. And I was, oh my God, my score was way over 200 after the first hour or something like that. But anyway, which proved that I was in the diabetic danger zone and cardiovascular danger zone and every other danger zone, because that's the source of all the inflammation that occurs. And that was the source root cause of my heart attack, of my cardiovascular disease that I didn't know. And even though I had passed a stress test with flying colors, let's see, I cover this in chapter 17. Even Dr. Ford Brewer, the reason why I brought him up initially is because he wrote a book. It's called Prevention Myths: Why Stress Tests Can't Predict Your Heart Attack and Which Tests Actually Do. And the reason for that is, you see, when you do a stress test, in order to detect any potential problem, you have to have at least 50% blockage in the arteries, at least 50%. However, about 70% of all the heart attacks occur with less than 50%. So what are we doing here? It's like, what? Why doesn't the cardiology community know this when there's a study that I have in the book that you and your audience can look up right now and shows that? It's like, oh my God. And that's why there's so many people that pass their heart attack, pass their stress test, have a heart attack and die. That was, there was a newscast guy, Tim Russert. He had this popular show on Sunday mornings called Meet the Press. And he was in the studio, passed out, and died of a heart attack. There was this wonderful actor, comedian, what's his name? Gary Shandling. I love that guy. He was awesome. Heart attack. And he died. He had just passed his stress test. He was only 66. And there was this old singer from this old group called the Monkees, Davy Jones. He was also in his 60s, passed his stress test, and died of a heart attack. Even that, this is pretty recent. Alex Trebek, he had this game show, right?
Yeah.
And he had just passed his stress test and had the heart attack. Fortunately, he survived it, but then a year or two later, he was taken by pancreatic cancer, sadly. So if these celebrities with the money, more money than with enough money to that they can buy the best medical science there is, if they're dying and falling off, just think about the rest of us. And so that's why it's so you don't want to. There's other tests that you want to do in the book, and I'll let your audience check that out.
Yeah, absolutely. It's such a crazy thing too, because I imagine a lot of people going for this stress test, they pass it, and then they're probably like, oh, I'm doing pretty good. And then they go back to some of their old habits that maybe they wouldn't have otherwise. The type 2 diabetes that you talk about throughout the book, I love that part of it so much because it's something I had so many issues, so many problems. I was never diagnosed with type 2 diabetes because I didn't get the proper tests. I'm sure I had the belt, I had all of the other metabolic signs, like the 5 of them. I had all of those.
Yeah.
But one of the crazy things is, so for this documentary, I'm interviewing so many individuals that have returned to a proper human diet. They're avoiding the carbs, sugar, and the oils, and they're thriving. So many with type 2 diabetes that thought they had a life sentence. This is it. I've got type 2 diabetes forever now. And they did this. And it's like, I just interviewed someone 2 days ago, Daniel, and he looked in the camera and he's like, it was easy. Like, it wasn't even that hard. Like, I just stopped eating that food. And the type 2 diabetes, like within like 3 weeks, a month, his numbers were back to regular. After 12 years of type 2 diabetes, insulin and medication and suffering, and you just turn it around. But the thing I didn't know was, before this, I always thought type 2 diabetes was a life sentence because I have a lot of family members who have had their entire lives. But what I learned from your book that I really didn't know that much is how it's a precursor to all these other things, like you talked about cardiovascular disease and everything else. One of the things too, the common theme that I'm learning more, and part of this is for this documentary, is learning more and just kind of teaching other people from an individual's perspective, is the importance of metabolic health. The only thing I ever heard from all of my doctors that really pisses me off is you can't eat meat. You're going to clog your arteries, like cholesterol. Nobody ever mentioned metabolic health. You talk about that a lot in the book as well. But like everyone that I talk to about not even just eating carnivore, eating a proper human diet, they're all just terrified. What cholesterol? What about the numbers? I'm like, you should be terrified about having poor metabolic health or being pre-diabetic. It's going to lead to all of these other things. But yeah, it's such a hard thing to get across to people. They just have it ingrained in their brain.
I know I know they hear it from, well, look, I think people, when they see the doctor's white coat they go blind. They lose IQ points. Something happens. They think that they know everything, knows all, sees all. And he says it's the cholesterol, and they just don't know. And that's why my book is more needed by most doctors than the regular folk. But I think the more of us we become aware of the true science, I don't know, it makes you think. I mean, with the way it's just so unhealthy, these things that they recommend, you kind of think, well, do they want us undernourished and overfed and, over psych drugged and under, it's just amazing. You start thinking about all these things that sound conspiratorial, but hey,
Right. Well, for the documentary, I asked our friend, Dr. Barry, that was one of the questions. I'm like, is this some big conspiracy? Like, how did we get this place so messed up? And he's like, well, when there's a bunch of people and they're all telling a little bit of lies here and a little bit of lies there, and money, like every financial incentive is pointing to more and more highly processed, cheap, garbage, addictive food, we end up in this place. But on one hand, like that sounds great. On the other hand, it's like, man, some of the stuff is so crazy. It really makes you think, like, what is going on?
No. It's, human nature, I guess. It just seems like when you put money near human beings,
right,
they will either look the other way or they'll participate somehow,
right.
I'm sorry to say, but that's what I've observed in my life. And so we really need to get some true, I guess the truth is coming from us victims, you and I,
right,
to take the dive and find out the truth and say, hey, this is how it is. And then we find guys like, Dr. Ken Berry, Dr. Philip Ovadia, Dr. Sean Baker. By the way, I was on his last week, but he had some technical issues about 10 minutes in. So we had to end that, and we're going to do that again in a couple of weeks. But, you find all this, and what you'll find in the group in my book is I found the low carb. I found Dr. Eric Berg, and he wrote me a great, because I think he's more carnivore now, but, and I had a misunderstanding about carnivore. I thought carnivore was you only eat meat. I mean, some people do that, but I think they're calling that now the lion diet, right? Whereas Dr. Sean, who wrote the book on it, he says, look, it's just animal products, whether it's eggs or beef or, it's just animal products.
Right.
You get rid of all the grains. And oh my God, I have a whole chapter on wheat and grains. It's just, you got to check that. Don't miss that one. It's chapter 10. And I call it, Are You a Wheat Addict?
Right.
And if you don't mind, I could get into a little bit of that too. There's some shocking information there.
I would love to. I reread that one this morning on the wheat part of it, and that was crazy. Yeah. Just one thing real quick on the carnivore thing. Like, sure. I do carnivore, beef, butter, bacon, eggs, meat, and then lion is more ruminant animals. But initially our whole documentary, it was going to be, let's do a documentary on the carnivore diet. And I've since evolved it to proper human diet. Ken Berry uses that one a lot. We're actually kind of working with him on that. But my whole thing is, humans have just escaped so much from what is natural. Your example earlier, smoking cigarettes, like what's more unnatural than lighting a piece of paper on fire? You get cancer, you get illness, you get sickness. And that's kind of what this has evolved to. It's like carnivore, ketovore, whatever it may be. I've returned to what is natural, like that humans have eaten since the start of time. That's what I'm going to focus on and avoid this other stuff, which is, I think, easier for people to wrap their brain around. The other way I would tell people too is, I don't tell them I'm carnivore. I just say, doing an elimination diet, and I'm not going to eat any of these crazy toxins and seed oils, carbs and sugars, high fructose corn syrup, food dyes, pesticides, glyphosate, forever chemicals. Like, is it so crazy that I don't want to ingest that stuff in my body? Let's just see what'll happen, kind of thing. But
that's beautiful.
The wheat part in the book, could we talk about that a little bit? Because that was incredible. You talk about 60,000 products in the grocery stores, and I love that part as well.
Oh, yeah, we can go into that. But one little comment on what you just said. My chapter 3 covers what you're just talking about. It's all, and I have it early in the book, because these evolutionarily developed bodies were built for a high-fat, low-carb diet.
Yes.
It's ancestral. It's how these evolutionarily developed bodies are used to eating for hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years. confirmed by anthropologists and bioarchaeologists, at least 2.6 to 4.5 million, right?
Right.
And so to say, we should be vegan or vegetarian is like, what? Are you
Right.
kidding me? It's
It's,
like,
I
it's
love this.
insane.
I don't know if you've heard this, Daniel, the football field analogy. It's like if you take a blade of grass at the end of the football field, that's the standard American diet right now that we're doing, where the cancer rates are going through the roof, obesity, type 2 diabetes. That whole entire football field, people ate like Daniel and I eat. We're eating proper human food. So I get people telling me this carnivore diet's a fad diet. I'm like, this has been around since the start of time. The standard American diet, that blade of grass at the end, that's like it's the biggest science experiment of all time. It's the biggest fad diet of all time. Everyone's getting sicker and sicker, and people say carnivore is like a cult too. And I'm like, the standard American diet's a little bit more like a cult. If you're eating food that is descending your belly out, you're getting diabetes, you're getting illness, you're getting sicker, and then you're justifying and saying, I just enjoy it, it's fine to do. I'm like, that's kind of craziness.
Oh my God, it's just fad diet. That is so funny. You crack me up there. But one more before I get into the wheat. The book is basically also a situation and data analysis of this. In 1930, the obesity rate was 1%. We're now approaching 50% in under 100 years. In 1930, the chronic disease rate was 7%. We're now over 60%. You got to say, what the hell is happening? Never before in human history has a large population like this gotten so fat and so sick so fast. I mean, under 100 years is like, what? That's like a snap of the finger in the eons of time. And so that's kind of what the book resulted from too. Looking at that, you go, okay, so what the hell happened in these last under 100 years to cause this catastrophe? Right.
I love that about the book. I was going to ask you a question. You just answered it. Does humanity need healing? Like, my goodness, you look at those stats. You answered the question there. The other thing, too, that's remarkable to me, and the reason I started doing this was mental health, depression, anxiety. And there's so much more evidence about improving your metabolic health and how that affects people with schizophrenia, PTSD, these horrible mental health illnesses for years. They fix their metabolic health, and that improves as well. But I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No. You're totally right. In my chapter 5, I have several studies that show when you don't eat enough meat, the rates of anxiety and depression and all these mental illnesses is going way up. And that's likely because of the lack of B vitamins that these people get, which really contributes to, healthy brain function and so forth. And that they say that also the mental health problem is going up, especially with the expansion of these vegan and vegetarian diets. Right. It's like, anyway, that's chapter 5. It's called What You Urgently Need to Know About Cholesterol. And I got some killer data in there. You'll get to it. You'll like it. But anyway, with regard to the wheat, oh my God, this blew my mind too. I have a picture of a guy. Well, it's his skull. He's 100,000 years old, right? The skull is. And he's got these perfect teeth. And I ask, do you think he had an orthodontist or brush 3 times a day, floss?
He must have flossed.
Right. Said, no. What happened was after, human beings didn't start eating wheat and grains until about 9 or 10,000 years ago. And anthropologists tell us that they used it as fallback food. When animals were not available, they used that. Clever humans found that when they could get the seeds of these plants and grind them up and heat them up with a little water or something, they could make something like a porridge, and it helped them to survive another day, another week, another month. But their health and longevity and their wellness took a serious toll. And after this 9 or 10,000 years ago, towards the present, they started exhuming bodies, and they found all the tooth decay, missing teeth, all these new diseases, not as bad as the last 100 years, but all these new diseases. Bone diameter shrunk and the length and everything. Men shrunk 5 inches, women shrunk 3 inches. I mean, it all changed. It was a disaster. And because we were always meant to eat meat, animals, our diet consisted of what we could catch, kill, and eat nose to tail, right? And what we might pick off the tree or a vine, that kind of thing. And that's why I was pleased to see Dr. Berry. He was saying, yeah, we have some blueberries here and there because, you know, you and I, 12,000 years ago, if we came across while we were hunting, we came across some berries that were in season. Oh my God. We'd tell Uncle Frog Magog and he'd spread the word and we'd all go eat some berries, right? I mean, come on. I mean, you know, we don't think about superfoods or, hey, this is not part of the carnivore diet. I got to, you know, we ate what we could when it was available and things that were tasty. I mean, you know, we have to use our common sense with all this. So anyway, what you're saying is exactly right with the whole ancestral diet. So with the wheat, you know, what they found was, let's see, it was in the late 60s, early 70s, that big food changed all of it. It used to grow to shoulder height, right? Amber waves of grain and all that, and have these fields. But then they came up with this new way of, it's now called semi-dwarf wheat. It's only 18 inches tall, but the seeds are bigger, and that's where they get a bigger crop from. So they figured that out, and they had this process called what's called radiation mutagenesis. And what does that do? That amps up this chemical called gliadin, Gliadin, gliadin. So what does that do? Gliadin attaches to the opiate receptors of the brain. The same opiate receptors as morphine and heroin. It doesn't get you high or relieve pain, but what it does is makes you crave more of the things that have the wheat and grains in it, like bread, pasta, cereal, crackers, biscuits, waffles, pancakes, chips, pretzels, rolls, pizza, tortillas, and on that way, right? And like you said that before, that stat.
Quick interruption. Thank you so much for watching. If you're interested in learning more about our documentary, Healing Humanity, The Power of a Proper Human Diet, or supporting it, please visit donate.healinghumanity.movie. Our goal is to reach millions of people that are hopeless right now and sharing the examples of real people over the course of 1 year that are undertaking a proper human diet to overcome obesity, type 2 diabetes, depression, anxiety, fertility issues. We couldn't do it without you. We thank you so much. We are also selling these shirts, Healing Humanity, The Power of a Proper Human Diet. Every penny we get from those goes towards the documentary. And last, we have memberships. If you click the little join button, it's best to do it on desktop. Under any one of my YouTube videos, you can join and become a member. We have hundreds of members right now. We do members only videos. We do members only behind the scenes. You can email me as a member and I'll answer you. And every penny from that goes to support the documentary. And the last thing is we have these Redmond's portable salt shakers. These things are awesome. You can get the best salt. You can take it with you. We sell these on the website along with our water bottles and cutting boards, and every penny from all of those goes 100% towards supporting the documentary. You can also sign up for our newsletter, which is completely free. All of these links are in the description below. Thank you so much for your support. Now back to today's video.
The average supermarket has 60,000 products. 59,000 of them have wheat or some form of wheat. It's just amazing. And I had in chapter 10, I put all the aliases that they have. So you got to read your labels. You know, when Big Food discovered that, they put it in everything. So 59,000 of those 60,000 contain wheat or some form of wheat because they are really coming after our opiate receptors. That's what they want.
Right. Man, it's as if the sugar isn't addictive enough. The carbs, then you have this as well. It's just crazy. I've heard that before, 60,000 products in the grocery store. I didn't hear the wheat part. That was amazing and very interesting. And I think you said it's in like Twizzlers or something too, like wheat in Twizzlers.
Twizzlers, if you look at the ingredients, the second ingredient is wheat. The candy Twizzlers. It's like, what?
Wow. See, I've heard stats about sugar like that it blew my mind in the past before. Like, you know, sugars in bread, sugars in cigarettes, sugars in like table salt. I'm like, my goodness, they just hit you with everything. That's the thing that always drives me nuts too about, I guess, if you get into the sustainability part of it or whatever, I get criticized for eating meat because of the environment. And then I think, well, I go to the grocery store with 60,000 products and there's like 5 of them that I'll eat, like beef, butter, bacon, eggs. That's it. But then all of that other stuff that's highly processed, it's in a factory, it's got to be shipped on semis all over the world. Most of the meat I get right down the road from my neighbor, just locally raised beef. But it's so funny how the meat's the big culprit, and the other 59,995 products, those just appeared there magically.
It's just so crazy. It's just we've been just fed a lot of propaganda. And it's, there are vested interests, whether it's big food, big pharma, big medicine. I get into the whole pharma thing too, especially with the statins, because, people with high cholesterol live the longest. People with low cholesterol die much earlier and usually have some form of cancer.
Right.
It's just backwards.
Everything's backwards. Have you noticed that? Like, the deeper you get into all of this, everything's backwards and upside down. The food pyramid's upside down. High cholesterol is good. Low cholesterol, it's like everything is just completely inverted. It's crazy.
Check this out. I think your audience would appreciate this too. There was a large study done on, if we're talking about statins, and the researchers wanted to know, how much longer do the statin takers extend their lives? Was it months, years, decades? So they had this study. It was a large meta-analysis. I can't remember how many studies, but it involved 92,135 patients. And so they wanted to know, how much longer, and the results were shocking. What they found, they had two groups, and they found that those in the group taking statins for primary prevention, in other words, no heart attack yet, they lived a big 3 days longer than those in the other group not taking a statin. People taking statins for secondary prevention, in other words, they already had a heart attack, they lived a big 4 days longer.
Oh my God.
The ones not there. So I asked my readers of the book, I said, do you still want to put up with the nasty side effects? Because for some people, they could be pretty damn nasty.
Yes.
Aches and pains and road rage and different types of psychosis. You drop at least 20 or 30 IQ points.
What are the downstream effects of all those things too that they don't know? These doctors don't know, or the interaction. So they put me on statins. I was on statins for about 10 years. I fell into that trap in my 30s, and I was taking those with 15 other medications. I'm like, I'm sure they understand all of these interactions between, like, all the permutations of interactions in there. It's just,
maybe they don't. Don't assume that they know. They
don't have no clue. Right? They have no clue. Yeah. They're just like, it's just fine. And then it's like 3 days, that's the benefit. And then thousands of dollars and doctor's visits and trips out to the pharmacy to refill it over and over again for 3 days. Had they told me that at the beginning, I'd have been like, nope, that's a no-brainer. You can have 3 days. Here's 3 days of my life. It's
such a shame. There's such corruption. I mean, another, this gal, Nina Teicholz, who New York Times bestselling author. You probably know about her book. Her book was, book of the year. It was The Big Fat Surprise, and why meat, butter, and cheese belong in a healthy diet. And she wrote me an amazing endorsement. But anyway, her and her group called the Nutrition Coalition, they, along with another group, they did this investigative study. And it was into the U.S. dietary guidelines. They wanted to look into the committee members. Let me back up a little bit. Every 5 years, they update them or they come up with new one. Right now, we're into the 20 to 2025 period. And they looked into it and they found that 95% of the committee members who came up with these guidelines, 19 out of the 20 of them had COI, conflicts of interest. In other words, they received financial backing from big food companies, big pharma companies, Dannon, Kellogg, General Mills. I can't remember the pharmaceutical companies. And they receive financial backing. And that's why, in our schools, it's okay to have the kids eat and Count Chocula and Lucky Charms. It's like, what? And they had this new chart, and meat, butter, and cheese were at the bottom, meaning they were bad for you. And all these other sugary cereals were way up there. And it's just, I have that in chapter 7 where I, cover, some of that corruption there too. But you're so right, man. I just, again, I share your passion for what they did to us. And I was just as infuriated as you were, and what drives you to make this documentary. And thank you for doing that. And we just got to continue getting the word out. And thank God we now have people like Dr. Ken Berry and so forth, because I love this guy. He is so funny and charming. When I first was invited onto his podcast, I was a little scared because I'm like, wait, he has how many millions of followers? It's like,
Three.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's just on YouTube. He's got a lot more just throughout social media. And I thought, oh my God, yeah, because I was a little worried. I think, well, yeah, I wrote the book and I know the data, but rolling it off my tongue in a smooth fashion, that's a little different, so you'll be just fine. So I went on, I did that. And that interview that I did with him went viral. And that's what really put the book on the map. It went to #1 on Amazon for heart disease, longevity, and type 2 diabetes. Because, on Amazon, they give you 3 categories to choose from. And now it's an international bestseller. And I'm like, you don't get rich selling health books, believe me. But I have become very wealthy in the fact that I hear from people all over the planet.
Yeah.
Telling me, Daniel, this is amazing. This has helped me so much. It's changed everything. I just eliminated these 3 things and I got so much better. And so that's what my thrill is right now, insofar as, I just made it my mission to do as many of these podcasts as I can to help get the word out, to get people to understand, this is the way to eat. It's very ancestral. It's what these evolutionarily developed bodies are used to eating for hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years, depending on which study you look at. So anyway, my hat's off to you, and I have big hugs for you, brother.
Likewise, I share that same passion, same mission. I just had a look. Sorry about that. Hearing individual stories, how they've changed their lives forever. There's like nothing more rewarding. Like if I had a small part of that in some way, and a lot of it is like, this isn't me. It's pushing them over to Dr. Berry, or pushing them over to your book, or pushing them over to some of these experts. But one of the things I wanted to mention to you real quick or talk about is some of the just unbelievable things that we've been seeing when people return to a proper human diet. I just interviewed a woman for a documentary. She was diagnosed with Parkinson's, rheumatoid arthritis, and a full stroke. She was bedridden.
Wow.
This is it. I'm done now. She's 70 years old. We just went and filmed her in South Carolina. She's ready to hike a 500-mile trail. She's exercising. It's incredible. Like, and the average individual, myself included, I'd be like, I wouldn't believe this. I have looked at all of her medical records, like full blown Parkinson's diagnosis reversed. And then
that's astonishing. That's great news.
Yeah.
Well, if she's just going on the carnivore or at least ketovore, ketovore is like, I didn't even know about that term. I told Dr. Ken when I was on his show, I said, hey, when I was on Dr. Ovadia's, I told him that I stole your term ketovore because I didn't know what that was. I knew what keto was. I knew what carnivore was. And so I thought, hey, I'm that because I do eat a little berries and that kind of thing. But anyway, you're so right. The changes that people can go through with their health. I mean, when I switched everything, you just do 3 things that I talk in the book about. You do some, go low carb or keto or carnivore. You do intermittent fasting because that's very ancestral. I mean, we were lucky to eat once a day, right?
Right.
I mean, we didn't have pantries. We didn't have refrigerators until like the 50s.
Yeah.
Microwaves weren't even around until the 70s. And it's like, snacking was never a thing.
Right. I always tell people too, I'm like, just look around with your own 2 eyes. Like, there's a big forest behind me. I'm like, what would you imagine people would have done thousands of years ago? There's winter. It's exactly like you said. You'd hunt a big animal. You might not eat for 3 or 4 days. And then in summertime, you come across some berries. We have wild berries out here 2-3 weeks. That's it. Like, that's the window. It makes sense. But yeah, people get stuck in the here and now so much. It's hard for them to imagine outside of it. But the other thing that we have in common in terms of issues. So you had the heart attack. I've had an irregular heartbeat since birth. Legit. Like I have all my health records to back all this up. I've worn so many heart monitors. Every time I go to the doctor, I had an irregular heartbeat. And about 7 years ago, I was diagnosed with congestive heart failure. I had a TIA mini stroke here in our house. And ever since I've had the congestive heart failure, just been weak and tired and fatigued and all these symptoms. This is the craziest thing that happened for me. I think I talked to you a little bit about this in email, but I was going to go in and get my heart scan in the meantime. While I've had that, I had my heart echo done. My congestive heart failure has reversed. I was at an ejection fraction of 44 before, and it's 60 now. When people hear 60, they're thinking 100's good. 60 is right at normal. I went from 44 to 60 normal, and my doctor actually wrote in the notes, he was like, your heart is like, it was almost, when I read it back, I was almost confused. He's like, your heart is good. You have no more evidence of cardiomyopathy, which was, so I had congestive heart failure in my records, cardiomyopathy, and a low ejection fraction. And on top of it, this one just blows my mind the most. This irregular heartbeat, every time I went to the doctor, probably 1,000 times, the nurse would check your heart. She would say, did you know you'd have an irregular heartbeat? And I'm like, yes, it's in my records. You guys tell me this. Like, it wasn't sometimes erratic. It's completely gone. I had it since birth. My mom was taking me to pediatric cardiologist when I was like 2 years old. I had it since birth, and it's gone. And so you mentioned Dr. Philip Ovadia. He's awesome. I did one talk with him a while back, and we're interviewing him for the documentary. So I'm going over all of the results. It's all in my medical records too. So people are like, that's unbelievable. I'm like, I wouldn't believe it either. I have it in my medical records. Here it is. So
excellent. Yeah, he's amazing. He wrote me a great endorsement too. I put one little sentence of his on the back of the book, if I can read it. It says, because it's much longer, and I one sentence, he says, and I had to put it back here with the rest of them. And it says, to anyone who doesn't want to see me or one of my colleagues standing over them in a hospital bed, read this book.
Yes. I love that.
I love that. No, that's wonderful. Yeah. The ejection fraction it doesn't have to be 100, depending on which study you look at or which group, 50 or to 65 is basically, if you're in that range, you're good to go. So it's always a good idea. I just had an echo a little while back because that's the one thing that most people don't know. They know their cholesterol number, but they don't know their ejection fraction. And the ejection fraction is so much more important. I mean, a lot of researchers and doctors are calling it the MVP, the most valuable player, because that one goes down. You get into stage 1 heart failure, stage 2, and you get down, and then within a certain amount of time, you're in hospice. But anyway, that is great news that you got that, you got it back up again. That's fantastic. And I had so many benefits. And I went from a heart attack to a 6-pack, and I never had a 6-pack before. And that wasn't even a goal or something that I wanted to accomplish. They just appeared just living an ancestral diet. And then I'm going, well, this is because I have these pictures of hunter-gatherers in the book.
Yeah.
They don't have any fitness centers near them, right? They are, chiseled and fit, and it's just a man. And then I realized that this is why I have the 6-pack now. And anyone can get it, because once you make that switch, you dissolve the fat that's around the bellies, because, and when I talk about the 6-pack, I'm talking about, I don't mean the professional bodybuilders type 6-pack. I'm talking about the 6-pack or the abdominal muscles that exist on any human being that are covered up with fat tissue. You dissolve that, and there they are. So anyway, I had a wonderful transformation, just like you did.
Yeah. And one other thing I think you talked about in the book a little bit too was people seem like it's like anti-aging. It seems like you're going in reverse. It was one interesting thing. I was talking to Dr. Barry about that earlier, and he corrected me because I was like, it seems like everyone that does carnivore, like they take 20 years off. They look 20 years younger. And he did his famous Dr. Barry finger that he has in all his thumbnails. He's like, He's like, no, Carrie, that's what everybody would look like if they were just eating a proper human diet all along. Like, we're reversing it, so we're noticing these things. But that would be the baseline for everyone if they just did it. I think the same thing with the 6-pack. Everyone would have that, obviously, if it wasn't covered up with the fat. That's never supposed to be.
Unbelievable. Yeah. Hey, listen, I'm 75 now. Wow. And I have the energy. I'm going to, in about 3 weeks, I'll be 76. So, this diet, again, it's an ancestral diet. It's what these bodies are used to eating. They're not used to eating all these foods that are made in the factory and all that kind of thing, and the things that we're addicted to that have been conspired about in these big food corporation conference rooms by these chemical geniuses. They're figuring out what can we put in here that'll addict them, that want them, they can't stop eating. They eat the whole bag instead of the half the bag. And carbohydrates, like you said, carbohydrates do not satisfy diet. Do not satisfy hunger. They stimulate it.
Yeah. That was, I had the highlighter out on that one. I'm like, that is so true.
Yeah.
And one other thing you have in the book, maybe if we could just talk about this quickly, you touched on it a little bit earlier, but with your heart attack and my heart disease, you talk about the most important predictor of heart attacks.
Well, that's your cardiovascular inflammation. And early in the book, in fact, I start going into this, I think it's page 2 of chapter 1. You have to understand the 2 most fundamental players in the processing of the food that you put in your mouth. And those 2 are glucose and insulin. And you eat something, the glucose goes up, the pancreas senses it and secretes out some insulin to bring it down or to keep it in the right range. And it's a balanced, normal process that goes on in life, no problem. But when your glucose is maintained high hour after hour from frequent sneaking, frequent eating, snacking, and so forth, and the wrong foods day after day, week after week, month after month, you become what's called insulin resistant because you've developed this thing called hyperinsulinemia. Hyper, too much insulin. Emia means in the blood. Too much insulin in the blood, hyperinsulinemia. And when that happens, you develop this insulin resistance, and that's what starts the inflammation in the body. And that process is what starts you down the diabetic avenue, which leads to all of the cardiovascular disease and the different cancers. Well, from Dr. Seyfried, he's, he'll tell you all that. You got to go with the ketogenic. You got to get your ketones going because the brain and the heart prefer ketones over anything else, over glucose, any second of the day. So you want to get into that state. And you have to remove the carbohydrates. And the carbohydrates include the sugar. So that's the carbs and the sugar. And the grains, what I didn't know, because I was totally believing in the propaganda and the BS of heart healthy whole grains. Right. I didn't know that when you put these heart healthy grains in your body, they turn into sugar. I didn't know any of that. So, that's what leads to it right there. The inflammation, the destruction of the glycocalyx that we covered earlier. And then you start developing the small dense LDL that invades the artery wall. And, there's a couple of, if we have time, there's a couple of studies I'd like to, that were really alarming and they rocked the medical world. And I covered it in chapter 17. I think it was 17. Yeah. And one of them was it was a large government funded $100 million study, 5,200 patients, slightly under 5,170 something. And they divided them into 2 groups. And one group got invasive procedures like CABG, coronary artery bypass graft. They call it CABG, or a stent, which they call PCI, percutaneous coronary intervention. That's where you get a stent installed. And along with some, medications, that kind of thing. And the other group, they sent them in the direction of lifestyle changes, lose 30 pounds, get back to the gym, stop eating the junk and all that. And they followed them closely over 4 years. And see, what they wanted to do is they wanted to prove that these invasive procedures were the shit because there's so much money made with them, right?
Right.
And after the 4 years, they just said, look, this was a failure. These invasive procedures failed to show that they prevent heart attacks. And that was the big headline. And then there was another study that duplicated that, was the Orbit trial and the Courage trial, same results. They failed to show that these invasive procedures we're any good at preventing heart attacks. And so I asked the reader in the book, I say, so do you think now they'll start to come to a halt except for in emergency situations? Because they are life-saving interventions. If the person's having a heart attack, if there's some emergency in the hospital, something's going on. But those are only done 15% of the time. 85% of all the heart attacks, I mean, all the stents and the open heart surgeries are done, it's these invasive procedures. And since now that we know, I say, do you think they'll now come to a halt or at least slow down? The chart's going like this. Because, I say, look, if those go away, and these studies really did rock the cardiology community and the medical community, because there's no way that the president of the hospital or the board of directors or the CEO of the cardiology clinic is going to want to see all that go away, because institutions and careers would vanish, because there goes the beach house and the kids in Ivy League. And, we go from a Mercedes to a Kia, everything would change, because there's such even Dr. William Davis, he was a cardiologist, and he said that he used to do these stents. He said, I would make $2,000 a pop. I would do 6 to 10 a day. I was like, what? And he wrote a great book. You should check this out. His book was called Undoctored: Why Healthcare Has Failed You and How You Can Become Smarter Than Your Doctor. Wonderful book. I recommend it. But anyway, since he's a cardiologist too, he's another good source. I don't know about his diet or anything, but insofar as those other things, or it's kind of an expose on the healthcare system. But believe me, hey, there's beautiful, wonderful people in that system.
Yeah.
Okay. They're saving our lives every day. We arrive there and they set the bone, or they suture up the wound, or they're removing bullets or steering wheels from our chest. So I love all of them. Even my older daughter, Chloe, got her degree in medicine at Loma Linda University Medical Center, and she works in the ER. So I talk to her about this stuff all the time. And it's just pretty wild. But anyway, yeah, like that. So those trials failed. They don't prevent heart attacks.
Love it. I love how you mentioned inflammation too, because that's, I guess if the viewers here take nothing else away, you mentioned Professor Seyfried too. We just got back from filming him, and that was one of the biggest eye-opening things. Like, I knew about type 2 diabetes, obesity, all autoimmune disorders, all these things that people have. But when I started learning more about cancer, and Professor Seyfried, his thing is cancer is a metabolic disease, and most often you can get cancer from smoking cigarettes or coming in contact with toxins, but most of it's from chronic inflammation. And I know that for decades and decades, I was chronically inflamed, not from smoking cigarettes, but from eating carbs, sugar, and oil, like eating the stuff I shouldn't eat. That's what chronic.
Hey, that was me. Hey, I'm with you. I was with you in that club, buddy. So I love that you found all this so early in your life. I mean, compared to me, I'm an old timer, but I expect to be, have a lot more years on it. But, even though, and I was discussing this with Dr. Ovadia, because as you know, he's, such a genius in the whole cardiovascular area. I said, look, when you have a heart attack, you have permanent damage to your heart. Nobody knows to what degree or how many months or years it might chop off your longevity. So I know that. I found that out. All right. So what can I have control over? I decided I'm going to get into the most superior metabolic health as I can possibly get. And maybe, I don't know if it's, it'll balance that out or what, but that's the thing that I can have cause over. Whereas the others, damage is already done, and I'm just going to keep an eye on things. That's why once a year, I do keep an eye on my ejection fraction, even though I get to the gym. And another key thing that you might want to look at is fasted exercise. Now, fasted exercise, and I cover this in chapter 9. Anything you want to know about, was it chapter 9? Yeah, chapter 9. It's been a secret to Hollywood trainers for many years to put their actors and so forth through the fasted exercise. That's what, what's his name? Oh, Hugh Jackman, the Wolverine. He got completely ripped doing the 16-hour fasting and doing exercise during it. It is just, and I have 2 studies in the book too. They had 2 groups. One did fasted exercise and the other group did fed. In other words, they ate breakfast. And in 1 month, the one that did the fasted exercise lost 30%, 300% more fat mass than the other group that was ate breakfast. That's huge. So you really burn up the fat mass if you exercise. That's what I do. I try to do my intermittent fasting because that's so amazing for the autophagy that gets going in the body. And because it's very ancestral too, because again, like we said before, it's, we were lucky to eat once a day. So we were always in a sort of a semi-fasted state. So we have that. And I get to the gym, towards the end of my fast, either mid to late morning. And I try to do 18 hours a day, between 16 and 18 hours. And that's where the carving of my stomach came in. So anyway, if anybody's really looking to lose some serious pounds, read chapter 8, which is all about intermittent fasting. I give tips and tricks and everything else. And then chapter 9 is what's the best exercise, whether it's fasted, not fasted. You got it. There's certain, and one last thing I'll say on that. There was a big study they did, and they wanted to find out, okay, so do people over 40 need to exercise differently than people under 40? And what they found that for people over 40, what they measured it against was all these metabolic markers, HDL, triglycerides, A1C. And they found that they were looking at the difference between resistance training, weight training or the weight machines, and cardio, whether it's the cardio machines or the treadmills or the, jogging, that kind of thing. And they found that it was a shocking amount of improvement for those over 40 if they did resistance training as opposed to the cardio. And then there was another one. They found that with men over 40, the more cardio they do, the lower their testosterone goes. Ooh, that's not good. And you got all these guys out on the road that are doing all this cardio. And I have a whole section in chapter 14 about testosterone for the guys. But anyway, back to you, my brother.
No, that's all great stuff. It's so interesting too, because a lot of it is, like you said, it just ties back to ancestral behaviors. It's like, would we have been running and running and running? No, we probably would have ran from a lion or something here or there.
Sprinting.
Right. Sprinting.
Like Dr. Sean O'Mara.
Exactly.
Who I spoke to a little while ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sprinting is just, that's what we did.
Right.
we weren't jogging
right.
as a habit. We weren't getting on treadmills.
Right.
It's just wild.
We just got to return to what's natural for humans ancestrally, and everything seems to get better. You just get the heck out of the way, let the body do what it's intended to do. It's amazing the healing that happens when you do that. But this has been great, Daniel. Thank you so much for doing this. I highly, highly, highly recommend Daniel's book, Unholy Trinity. I'll put links in the description for all of Daniel's stuff. Is there anything else you want to shout out or mention before we wrap things up?
Yeah, well, listen, you can go to danieltrevor.com. You can get a free preview of the book. And what that is, that's like the first 48 pages. And then you can decide for yourself. And I also send out a weekly, bi-weekly newsletter or excerpt from the book, that kind of thing. And underneath that video that's near the top I talked about on danieltrevor.com, you'll see all these amazing endorsements I've got. I'm so flattered by all that. It's like, wow,
Yeah.
Anyway, so like that, and get on the mailing list, and there you go. Big hugs, brother. I really appreciate you having me on. And again, I just think it's so wonderful that you're getting the word out on the truth about how these metabolically developed bodies are, how they need to be fed properly. The proper human diet, as Ken would say, right?
Right. Absolutely. Well, thank you for your kind words. And I absolutely love what you're doing as well. I love the book. It's just I really believe that's going to save some people's lives. So much great information. It would have saved mine if I would have found it before. So thank you so much, Daniel. Anytime you need anything, I'd love to have you back. Maybe we do a live stream at some point. But thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it.
Sounds great.